Hello, YouTube. This is a very interesting unsolved mystery in the very fascinating and often inexplicable land. I will present the information from open Russian sources and ask you a question at the end of this presentation. It has to do with the mystery of physicist Carl Dish, who disappeared without a trace at the bird station in Antarctica. But first, let's describe the station using Western open sources. The IGI station, Field Camp, has supported West Antarctica science for more than 50 years. At the 80 degrees south latitude and 119 west longitude, the U.S. Navy personnel was charged with establishing the first bird station during the 1956-57 period for the International Geophysical Year. That's what IGI stands for. Named after the famed polar explorer, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd Jr., the new station was officially commissioned by the military on January 1st, 1957. The first station was only used for 4 years because the weight of snow threatened to collapse it. Construction of the second research station began in 1960, about 6 miles from the original location. Commissioned on February 13, 1961, New Bird Station was located underground except for some scientific structures. Tunnels connected the station's various facilities, which served to support the largest inland scientific program at the time. The New Bird Station outlived its predecessor, lasting for about a decade. In 1972, the station was redesigned and moved to the surface. It was then used as a summer-only field camp. Bird Surface Camp carried on support for science in West Antarctica in succeeding summers, but it was scaled down from the heyday of the 1950s and 1960s. Well, in the 1970s and 1980s, the camp primarily supported the new Sipol station at the base of the Antarctic. But let's now see what they say in Russia about this case. Called desolate and extremely large in area, Antarctica is the only large part of the land on Earth where there is no permanent residence, and it is still poorly explored. Despite the fact that this continent is covered with snow and ice, very little precipitation falls on it. The snow that is there has been accumulating for hundreds of years because it is too cold to completely melt. Local living conditions are very harsh, and therefore there are still only rare individual research stations and no permanent settlements. With the exception of a relatively small number of mountain ranges and glaciers, Antarctica is unremarkable. There is no macroflora or permanent macrofauna in the vast expanses of dazzling white snow and ice. Therefore, it is not surprising that the local landscape is considered dreary and frightening. Over the past 100 years, since regular research expeditions began to take place in Antarctica, many strange and gloomy incidents have accumulated, from mysterious disappearances of people to no less mysterious murders of pets brought to that land by scientists. One of these disturbing events, which remained unsolved, occurred in 1965 and is associated with the very strange disappearance of the American physicist Carl Robert Dish, who worked at the Boulder Laboratories. Dish and other scientists in 1965 arrived at the Antarctic station Byrd, located 600 miles from the South Pole, for a long-term research mission. For the next 6 months, Dish mostly worked in a radio booth, which was located 1 mile away from the main station building. A rope was stretched between these houses, which helped not to get lost when moving in harsh weather. Carl Dish was well versed in the terrain and repeatedly skillfully moved between the buildings, holding onto a rope. But that morning, on May 8th, he left the radio booth but never reached the station building, disappearing forever. It was found out that Dish left the radio booth at 9:15 a.m. when it was still dark. A strong wind was blowing and the temperature reached minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like minus 42 degrees Celsius. But Dish was very warmly dressed in special clothes for Antarctic explorers, and the passage between the houses would not take him more than half an hour. When Dish failed to show up at the station by 10 a.m., his colleagues became so worried that they assembled a search team and began searching the area in that space, but of the rope between the two buildings. At 11:30, they found a chain of human footprints that came from the radio booth. The tracks started at the foot of the ladder attached to the house, but instead of going south along the rope, as one might expect, they headed west, so to the ski trail left by scientists. Dish's colleagues followed these tracks and followed them for about 4 miles before the tracks suddenly disappeared. It was very strange because the scientists looked all around and there was no body, presumably covered with snow, nor evidence indicating that someone attacked Dish and dragged his body away. It also seemed strange that for a person who got lost in a blizzard, the chain of Dish's tracks looked not as if he was moving back and forth, and certainly in an attempt to find the direction to the station, but as if he was purposely walking in one particular direction. This suggested that Carl did not consider himself lost at the time of the movement, and he was not confused. Due to the fact that they were running out of gas, the team could not inspect the place where Dish's tracks disappeared for a long time, so they returned to the station. They decided to refuel their vehicles there and then return to studying the tracks again. After refueling, the group returned and conducted a thorough 3-hour search in the area, but it also yielded nothing. At 6 o'clock in the evening, they returned to the base with nothing due to the fact that the wind had increased and it was impossible to continue the inspection further. But they did not give up hope, because there was a chance that Dish was still alive and freezing somewhere, lost and waiting for help. They began to inspect everything around the station and the radio booth, and then formed a human chain to search the route leading from the base to the ski trail near which his tracks disappeared. Despite the difficult weather conditions, they lit searchlights and launched flares every 30 minutes until visibility became so poor that this measure was considered ineffective. The next day, the third search operation began, which checked the territory along the chain of tracks from the base to the ski track. Alas, by that time, the tracks had been largely destroyed by a strong wind. From time to time, they came across intact tracks, but after 4 miles, they still disappeared. On the morning of May 10, 1965, 2 days after Carl's disappearance, another large-scale search began. The search group consisted of 8 people, 2 vehicles, a tractor, provisions, and fuel. The search began in the main complex of the station and then moved to the south, and inspections were carried out in the east and west, marking the inspected places with flags. However, despite a thorough check of the 12-mile zone outside the perimeter of the station, nothing was found. On May 12, searches were conducted in the northeast and southwest sectors in the area of the bird station. Although the weather was favorable then, the darkness made it very difficult to see them. Over the next 2 days, strong winds and fog so reduced visibility that the search became impossible. On May 14, 35 square miles had been checked, but Carl or any trace of him had never been found. A few weeks later, Carl Dish was officially declared dead. The questions that were asked then and are still being asked today: why did Carl deviate from the usual route along the rope, and how did he disappear without a trace? If he had just gotten lost and frozen, his body would have been found during the search. Why did his tracks stop, as if he had simply disappeared into thin air? Predator attacks were excluded immediately. Polar bears are not found in Antarctica, as in principle any four-legged predators. Over the past decades, many hypotheses have been made about what could have happened to Carl Dish. Starting from the predictable, he got lost and fell into the inconspicuous crack in the ice where no one found him, and ending with the abduction by aliens or Nazis from an underground base. One of the most curious theories suggested that Dish could have had a mental disorder, which is why he decided to commit suicide by going far away and somehow destroying part of his tracks. There were rumors that Dish had lost a card game shortly before his disappearance and was very upset, thinking that he had been deliberately deceived, and that he allegedly told other scientists that he would leave them to go to friends at the South Pole. Who is in question? I mean, who are those friends? We still don't know. As for the intervention of something supernatural, it is curious that several members of the search team reported that they saw unusual lights in the distance and heard strange sounds nearby, both before and after Carl's disappearance. Moreover, the source of the oddities was never discovered by them. There's also a political or geopolitical theory according to which Carl Dish was a Soviet scientific spy at the height of the Cold War between the United States and the USSR, and that he did not disappear but was evacuated from Antarctica by secret Soviet agents. And those strange lights and sounds that the members of the search group heard were from Soviet technology. But people who believe this just do not comprehend the extent of the cooperation between the superpowers in the world generally and in Antarctica in particular. Whether in the Bermuda Triangle, Mariana Trench research, or in other, let's say, paranormal areas of the globe. Please see my videos. I've laid out my case in great detail. Look, of course, the superpowers also spied on each other and so on. I'm talking about the highest levels of science and government. As for the question I want to pose, not long ago I made a video about Werner von Braun visiting the Antarctic in 1967. So was he visiting the same friends at the South Pole? I doubt we will know anytime soon, but Antarctica remains one big, giant mystery. And in my lectures, in my books, co-written with Philip Mantle, I show photographs of the strange UFOs observed by Soviet submarines and spy missions in the British Antarctica and other areas. And I, again, urge you to look at my videos about Antarctica, because what you will find there is not what you hear from so-called researchers sometimes and people interested in Antarctica. But again, I use mostly Soviet and Russian sources because that's my expertise. So thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my research, you will find links on how to do it in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel.